Welcome to Fandom Pending. I'm Michaela. Thank you for tuning into this episode. Today's fandom is Marvel and DC Comics. I wanted to share with you the comics I read in 2024 and my thoughts on them. This list will be separated by reading order and not by ranking order. I'll probably rank all of these comics at the end of the video. I'm going to try to avoid spoilers with this episode in case you want to read any of these comics. First up, we have Superman Smashes the Klan by Jean Luen Yang and art by Guahiru. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that this is the first Superman comic I've ever read. I've read comics with Superman in them, but never with him as the main character. I really enjoyed this comic overall. At first glance, this comic might seem it's geared towards a younger audience, its simplistic art style aimed at kids. However, it really deals with heavy subjects such as racism and a group similar to the KKK. Comic is based on a radio show from the 40s, and from what I've heard, the story is basically the same. Superman Smashes the Klan follows a young Chinese American girl, Roberta, and the rest of her family in the 1940s as they move to Metropolis for her dad's job. The family is targeted by the Clan of the Fiery Cross, and when Roberta's family is in danger, she gets help from Superman. This comic is interesting because it not only focuses on Clark Kent as the main character, but Roberta as well. Roberta serves as a mirror to Clark Kent's development and him figuring out who he is as Superman and him being an alien. I think this is a great read for anyone who hasn't read a Superman comic before. It's really a good starting point to get into. All you need to know is that Superman is not from Earth and he came here when he was a baby. It has a great message and really gives more depth to Superman as a character. Next up is Fantastic Four Volume 1, Whatever Happened to the Fantastic Four by Ryan North. The only thing I know about Fantastic Four is based on the 2000s Fox movies and one other comic I read. So going into this comic, I was very skeptical about the story, but boy was I wrong. This comic has a pretty solid story. Each issue focuses on a different character from the Fantastic Four. I read Volume 1, which has 6 issues. Issue 1 focuses on Ben Grimm. His issue was my favorite because the plot really reminded me of a Twilight Zone episode, with something being off with the town he's staying at with his wife. Issue 2 focuses on Reed Richards and Sue Storm. Their story was also interesting and had a very strong mystery element to it involving Doctor Doom. Issue 3 focuses on Johnny Storm and what I found to be the weakest out of the issues, where the team was separated. Each issue on its own is a self-contained story until the end where they all come together. I wasn't expecting this comic to end on a cliffhanger. I was really getting into the story, and then at the end it was like a cliffhanger, and I totally forgot this was an ongoing series. But I mean, for the most part, the plot was pretty solid. Ben Grimm's story was definitely the strongest, and there were some dips in the story throughout the comic. However, once you understand the reason as to why the Fantastic Four are separated, or at the beginning of the comic, you really start to feel the emotional weight of the story. I feel like the comic does pick up when the Fantastic Four are all together. Do you think it works as a story for them to have some tension and they are separated, and at the end they all come together. Next up is Afterlife with Archie by Roberto Aguirre Sacasa and art by Francesco Francavilla. I hope I pronounced that right. I've read classic Archie comics here and there, and I think they're quite enjoyable. They're a guilty pleasure. I love it when comics with a simplistic comic strip like style like Archie are adapted into a detailed comic book style. Around Halloween time, I read Afterlife with Archie, which is based on the premise of Archie characters as zombies. Afterlife with Archie follows Archie and his classmates on Halloween after a zombie apocalypse breaks out. I only read the first 5 issues of Afterlife with Archie, and I found it pretty enjoyable, which is what I keep saying for all of these, but it's true. I think the series was cancelled after the second volume, but I didn't really get that far in my reading. I did hear as you read on, there was more of a supernatural element to it beyond zombies. I didn't expect the story to get so dark and gory at times as it did, and you really feel for these characters in these situations. If you've seen any type of zombie movie, comic, parody TV show, you know, there's always a group of people and then there's that one person that gets infected and they're like, oh no, and then it's really emotional. So it's, you know, there's plenty of that in here. You really feel for these characters in these situations, especially when it comes to them having to kill someone they love because they're a zombie. Other characters from the Archie universe are featured in the comics, such as Sabrina Spellman and Cheryl Blossom, so that was cool. Overall, this is a spooky comic perfect for the spooky season, featuring fantastic art and an interesting zombie story. Deceased by Tom Taylor. While on the topic of zombies, another zombie-themed comic I read around Halloween time was DC Comics' Deceased. Deceased came out in 2019 and features characters of the DC continuity of that time. The comic is not part of the main DC continuity and takes place in an alternate timeline. In the comic, Cyborg is kidnapped by Darkseid, who wants the anti-life equation, which is basically a fancy word of bringing zombies into the DC universe, which ends up turning Cyborg into a zombie and he infects the rest of the human race on Earth. Deceased is probably the best comic I ever read. I put it at the top of my list for DC Comics or even superhero comics. If you're a DC fan and love the characters, then, well, I don't know. Well, if you love the DC characters, I don't know if this is for you because most of them are turned into zombies. But I mean, if you like DC, this is for you. Deceased take on the zombie genre is really dark and frightening because it's in a world where a superhero or supervillain with powers is a zombie and is coming after you. It's even more frightening to think about it when someone all powerful, like when someone from the Justice League becomes a zombie. I did not expect this comic to be as dark and emotional as it was. I finished the first volume and immediately had to know more, and luckily there are some spin-offs and sequels to the comic. There are 3 spin-offs, A Good Day to Die, Unkillables, and Hope at World's End, and 2 sequel stories, Dead Planet and War of the Undead Gods. I'm a huge fan of the Bat family, so my favorite Deceased story was Deceased Unkillables because we follow Cassandra Cain and Jason Todd. Because it is a zombie apocalypse, all of the characters lose someone close to them at some point, and you really feel the emotional ramifications throughout the entire comic storyline. Something I really enjoyed about Deceased was that all of the stories were written by Tom Taylor, so the story really felt consistent and had all the characters that were handled in the same manner. Next up we have The Variants, a Jessica Jones mystery by Gail Simone with art by Phil Noto. Phil Noto is one of my favorite comic book artists of all time. His art are my art goals. Phil Noto being the artist for The Variants, a Jessica Jones mystery, was the only reason I read this comic. I know nothing about Jessica Jones other than the fact that she has her own TV show from Netflix. So going into this comic, I was a little confused on who the characters were. In this comic, Jessica Jones and Luke Cage are married and have a kid together, and different Jessica Jones variants from the multiverse are coming into Jessica's universe and endangering herself and her family. In the comic, there are different Jessica Jones variants explored, such as a Captain America variant and a Jessica Jones that was in love with Daredevil, so it's really interesting to see the different paths that Jessica has. The great thing about this comic is that there's only 5 issues. It's a great quick read. As I said before, I don't really know Jessica Jones, but Simone's story really made me care for her as a character and want to read more comics with her. If you have any Jessica Jones comics I should check out, please let me know. Next up is Spider-Man Life Story by Chip Zdarsky and art by Mark Bagley. Zdarsky and Bagley are 2 iconic names in the comic industry, so it's really cool to see both of them working on a comic together, especially a Spider-Man comic. Spider-Man Life Story follows Peter Parker from the 1960s all the way to the 2010s throughout his life, with him aging naturally. Life Story does something unique with Spider-Man by letting him age normal and not keeping him a teenager, which is what Spider-Man comics are known for. Real-world events and the biggest comic storylines are presented in each decade. Each decade has its own self-contained story that is still relevant to Peter's life overall. The major Spider-Man stories, such as Gwen's death, are still a part of Life Story and have many twists on them that still keep the story different while still remaining like Spider-Man. This comic is really well written and does a great job of exploring Peter as a character as he ages. However, the only complaint I have is that I really feel bad for Peter because in every Spider-Man media, he's always going through something because of his responsibility as Spider-Man, especially with people who do and don't know his secret. I was confused at times with certain plot points, and some decade storylines were more utilized than others. I have mixed feelings about the ending, and I do think it should have went a little differently. If you're a Spider-Man fan, you really appreciate this comic. I would rate this comic higher, but it gave me a hard time to like it because of the way how put down Peter was throughout the whole comic. And I get it, that's the whole point of Spider-Man and that's the whole point of characters as superhero characters. But I just feel like this guy needed a break. It's like his whole life he was going through something. Batman Under the Red Hood by Judd Winnick. My favorite comics are Batman comics or Batman adjacent comics, so it's no surprise that I enjoyed this comic. Black Mask is the main villain in this comic other than Red Hood, and the main reason I don't like him is because he killed Stephanie Brown. However, I really like Black Mask as a villain. He was really animated in this comic and brought a comedic side to this comic that has a dark story. This comic follows Batman as he investigates a new villain in Gotham, Red Hood, who turns out to be Jason Todd, his former Robin who was killed by the Joker from the infamous comic Death in the Family. I do think Jason Todd is a great character in this comic, and it really shows why he's so popular. Bruce's trauma over Jason Todd's death is apparent as he starts to piece together who Red Hood really is. Batman is a detective as he tries to look for a logical explanation to Jason coming back from the dead, and I love how he's not just looking for answers on his own, but talking to other DC characters such as Superman and Green Arrow. I love the cover art for each issue for Under the Red Hood. The art is done by Matt Wagner and is very reminiscent of the Batman animated series animation style, but more detailed. I always wanted to know what happened to Jason Todd following a death in the family, and this comic answered all of those questions and more, and provides an interesting story with Bruce Wayne, Dick Grayson, and Jason Todd. Last but not least, we have Batman: The Court of Owls saga. The Court of Owls might be the most popular Batman story in recent years and has a TV, movie, and video game adaptations. Court of Owls follows Batman investigating the death of a man in Gotham. All evidence points to the Court of Owls, a group based on the Gothamite nursery rhyme. However, Bruce knows that they don't exist and continues looking for answers. Nonetheless, Batman continues to investigate, leading him to discover he doesn't know Gotham as well as he thought he does. The comic was pretty straightforward until Batman encounters the Court of Owls in the labyrinth, and then it started to get really confusing for me. I still kind of don't know what or who the Court of Owls are. It's just the information was really confusing to me, went right over my head. If anyone has an explanation, please let me know. Also, this is a spoiler for the end, so please skip a minute or a couple minutes. But there's a character that claims to be Bruce's older brother, Thomas Wayne Jr. Now, in the comic, Bruce was put through a lot of psychological torture, and so I'm thinking, is this character messing with Batman, or is he really his brother? But that plot twist reminded me of a Spider-Man comic called Spider-Man Family Business, with Peter Parker having a long-lost sister named Teresa. Overall, I love this comic. It really felt like a movie and something I can imagine watching on the screen. It seemed to borrow elements from different Batman movies, but it really reminded me of Batman the Animated Series with all the detective work he does. However, the story does get violent and dark at times, so I would say it reminds me more of Matt Reeves' The Batman, especially the vibe and the mystery surrounding the Court of Owls. I wouldn't be surprised if James Gunn and his DCU used the Court of Owls as inspiration for his Batman, or even Matt Reeves having the Court of Owls in the Batman Part 2 or other sequels. So I could totally see that happening. Now, I'm going to rank these by the ones I really love the most to the least. I mean, I like these overall. I wouldn't say the ones at the bottom are horrible and I hate them. It's just the ones at the top really blew my mind and I grew to love them. First, we have Deceased. Second is The Variants, a Jessica Jones mystery. Third is Batman Under the Red Hood. 4 is Batman: The Court of Owls. 5 is Spider-Man Life Story. 6 is Superman Smashes the Klan. 7 is Fantastic Four. And last but not least, Afterlife with Archie. That's all I have for today. Have you read any of these comics or have a comic to recommend to me? Let me know in the comments. Please share your thoughts on today's episode and don't forget to subscribe. If you have any suggestions on what fandom or topic I should talk about next, leave a comment or message me on Instagram at FandomPending. Thank you for joining me today and I'll see you guys next time.